Hello again everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Kestrel mid-power model rocket by Apogee Components. Now here on the package it says it can fly supersonic or bust a mile high, but if you look down here at their suggested engines, none of those quite make it. So we will see if we can actually do this. You will probably have to do a lot of strengthening of this in order to get those kind of performances. But I'm going to build the kit the way they say to build it, but also show some places where we can increase the strength a little bit. So like always, we'll go ahead and open this up and make sure there's no problems in the kit. Alright, so we've got a whole bunch of tubes that may be inside each other there, so make sure you kind of shake these loose. And eventually we should get to the instructions. Alright, now usually the high performance mid-power rockets that are trying to break a mile of the sound barrier use a minimum diameter, and this one is not. This is actually very similar, a little bit shorter than the Estes Star Orbiter. Okay, now again they tend to give us catalog numbers here, but these are the tubes. So we should have an 18-inch long main body tube here. Right, a smaller 9-inch long payload bay tube. And that is very much different from the Star Orbiter in that it doesn't carry a payload bay. So this is a little more interesting. Alright, we have a 29mm tube for the engine mount. We have a 24mm tube, and this is to build a conversion adapter that will allow us to fly 24mm in this rocket. Okay, we've got a coupler. Alright, two engine blocks here. One for the 24mm and one for the 29mm. And then here we've got centering rings. Alright, let's see, we're missing a few things yet. So we've got decals here, which are self-adhesive vinyl. Alright, and then some more small stuff here. We have another centering ring or engine block. 1/4-inch launch lug. Alright, that's the bulkhead for the payload bay. Then we've got some threaded rod here, and this will be for the engine retainer. Okay, we've got a parachute kit. Kevlar shock cord, and we should have a couple of little hardware pieces here. We've got a nut that's part of the engine retainer, and a washer that goes with that nut. Okay, then we have the instructions in my hand here. There's our Kevlar plastic nose cone, we got that. Alright, and it looks like we've got everything. So I'm going to clear most of this away and we will get started. We're going to start with the motor mount, and for that we're going to need the 29mm motor mount tube, the set of centering rings here, the threaded ring with the nut and the washer, and the aft section of this nose cone and transition assembly. And so the first thing we want to do on this is just score the two pieces here where they're held together. You don't have to cut all the way through them, and then you can just break them like that. Okay, we'll set aside the nose cone for now, and we'll come back to the transition as well. Alright, next we need to draw a line all the way down the length of the motor mount there. Alright, and I'm going to use my Estes tube marking guide. You can also use a door frame or a piece of angle aluminum. Just anything that's going to give you a straight edge that will allow you to draw on here. Alright, and I'm going to take a pencil And just go down the whole length of this. Alright, so they've got a nice straight line. Alright, then we're going to come to our instructions. Alright, we need to make several marks along here. And just so I'm not confused later, I'm going to mark one end aft on the inside, so they'll face toward the rear. Okay, now we need a ruler, and we're going to make a mark at 7/8 of an inch from the aft end, or if you're metrically inclined like I am, 22 millimeters. Let me find my line again here. There we go. Okay, so 22 millimeters is right there. And then we need another line at 2 5/16 of an inch, or 59 millimeters. That would be right there. And then another one from the forward end, 1/4 of an inch, or 6 millimeters. Okay. Then we're going to take the rings out of this cardstock. Ring D, I believe, is extra. We don't need it, or at least not at this time. Don't throw it away quite yet, though. Alright, so here you just need to cut through the little remnants from the laser cutting process. The interiors of these you can throw away, or if you want to save them later for bulkheads or something like that, you can do that as well. Alright, and be careful, some of these, especially this one here, has 2 notches in it, one here and one here, and there should be a little bit of cardboard in between them. Alright, we can set that final one aside. We might or may not need it later. I haven't got to that part in the instructions. Okay, and so now these should fit on this tube. Okay, so the first one we're going to do is take ring C, which is the aftmost centering ring. Alright, and that should go up to this mark, so I'm just going to place this on here, dry fitting it. Okay, and the notch there should align with the line. Okay, now if this does not go on easily, just take a little bit of fine sanding paper and lightly sand inside here. And then check it. If it still doesn't, just do it again. You don't want to go too hard or too fast at once, because we don't want to break the paper or cardboard here at this notch. Okay, so once you know that it fits, put it back on there again. Alright, and then we can use some wood glue here. Okay, and I'm just going to put a bead of glue a little bit beyond our mark there. All the way around, and then we're going to push back the ring till we get to that mark at 22 millimeters. Okay, try and get that as even as possible. And any excess glue there you can just make into a fillet. Alright, but don't get glue in the notch. Okay, try and make sure that the ring is as even as possible. For the next part, you're going to need a piece of the shock cord here, and we're going to first remove 6 inches from that. And this will be used later on as a tie-in to the payload bay. Okay, so I'm just going to cut that there, hopefully. Looks like I need a new blade in that one. Now, to help keep this from unraveling further, what I'm going to do is put just a little bit of super glue on the ends of these. Okay, and just let it soak in. Alright, and just let that sit for just a few seconds. And then you can take some tissues or paper towel or a rag and just pull that through to get rid of the excess. Okay, and I'll let that finish drying, and then what you can do later if you want is once it's fully dry you can cut off this frayed end here. That one looks pretty good. But I'll just set this aside for the moment. Alright, then we have the rest of the shock cord, which is going to be anchored to the engine mount. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing here just so it's easier to work with. So I don't need to go all the way up to the end. I'm just putting this in right below the frayed part there. Okay, and then once more we'll just wipe off the excess. And now I'm actually going to cut this so that I remove most of that frayed area. Alright, a little bit of gluing it to my finger there. Okay, over on this end, that actually looks pretty good. I'm just going to dab a little on there, but I'm not going to worry about trimming it. Okay. Now, coming back to the motor mount, we're going to put a knot in one end of this and leave about 1 inch of free material there. So I'm just going to start with an estimate here and see how close we get. Alright, 2.6 centimeters for those of you who are going metric. So we just kind of move the knot down along there. And it doesn't have to be exact. Alright, that's going to provide an anchor point. Now, on this one, so now we need the B centering ring. Alright, our Kevlar line here is going to go not right on the line, but beside it. And so here I'm going to go ahead and put this at the forward end. I'm going to pass the line through it. Now this is the B ring, and it's got 2 notches. So the bottom notch is for the shock cord. All right, so this is going to go all the way down here. The notch on top, the outer notch there, is going to line up with the one we had previously. So you want to make sure that those are centered. Okay, and then we can pull this through. Alright, and basically that little knot is going to line up just to the side of the centering ring there and along our line, just like that. Okay, so once again I'm going to move my centering ring just a little bit. I'm going to apply some glue to that. Alright, and I'm going to push it into the glue. Okay, and once more we can go ahead and just fill it face there. Okay, now key thing before the glue dries is we need to make sure those two notches align, because what's going to happen is we're going to epoxy this threaded bolt here. Alright, so that should be in line with our pencil line, like that. Okay, now notice we have not done any gluing to our shock cord yet. Alright, our final ring, we're going to have to put the shock cord through that, pull that all the way through. Alright, now this one doesn't have an upper notch, it only has an inside notch. So we'll align that, and we're just going to put this on. There we go. Okay, now we'll go ahead and line this up so the shock cord is aligned. Okay, and this just goes on that mark we made right here. Alright, and as before, we're going to just push it back a little bit, add the glue. Okay, that goes all the way around. Okay, and once more we're going to line this up, and we're going to pull our shock cord nice and taut there. And once more, go ahead and fillet this around. And you can go ahead and put it on the shock cord at this point if you like. We're going to epoxy all this here in just a moment. Oop, that one moved on me. Alright, so make sure all your rings are on straight. And for now, we're going to let that dry for 5 to 10 minutes so that we don't have to worry about moving those centering rings again. Now, while the glue is drying on the centering rings, we can prepare the threaded rod here. Now, mine has a little bit of rust or gook on it up here, so I'm going to put this in the forward part so you won't see it. The nice clean end I'm going to have sticking out. And we need to make a mark here on this at 3/4 of an inch, or 19 millimeters. Alright, get the right scale here. Alright, and to mark this, I'm just going to use a permanent marker here. Okay, and so 19 is going to be right there. It's really faint, but I can see it there. Alright, and now I'm going to make up some 5-minute epoxy to place this and the shock cord in their permanent positions. I've prepared about 1 gram of 5-minute epoxy and stirred it up here. So it doesn't take a whole lot. And now I'm just going to run this along the line. I can put the shock cord back into it here in just a moment. And then I'm also going to put this down here. Alright, to start with, in both of those notches that will be for the threaded rod. Okay, and then we'll run some in here. Now we're also going to come back and put an epoxy fillet over this whole assembly. So if it looks like your glue is too sparse, don't worry about it yet. Okay, now I'm going to take my threaded rod here. Alright, and there's my mark, which has to be flush with the motor mount tube, just like that. Alright, so I'm going to set that in there. And the whole thing now has a tendency to flip over because it's got all that weight on it. Alright. Now here, if you have enough left, you can go ahead and put a fillet in now. If not, you can make up another small batch. Okay, and put that back. It wants to keep moving there. Okay, my fillet could use a little more. epoxy's already hardening here, so we've got to work quite quickly. Okay, and then we'll just mush this down into that epoxy. And then temporarily we can put a little piece of masking tape here to hold that all in place as the epoxy dries or hardens. Okay, and then up here, go ahead and put your shock cord into the epoxy. Now notice I'm wearing gloves to do this. Repeated exposure to epoxy on your skin can result in allergic-like reactions. We don't want those. Alright, so now I'm just going to prop that there, and we'll let that harden, and then we'll continue once that step is done. So the original epoxy has hardened here, and we've got a little bit of gapping going on. So I'm going to put some more epoxy fillet in here. Now, if you're trying to actually fly this 2 a mile or fly it supersonic, the more epoxy you add in here, the heavier it's going to be and the lower the performance. But at the same time, you need to have enough in here that you don't rip this out and have a recovery failure. Actually, if you're trying to go for speed or altitude, you might want to omit the threaded rod completely and just use a friction fit. But we're going to go with this, and I'm just going to add a little bit more epoxy here to fill in those holes. Alright. Okay, and the rest of that looks pretty good. That shock cord is nicely embedded there. So we'll let this harden and come back. The next step on the motor mount is to create a boat tail from this transition. And in the instructions here it shows us that we are going to use 2 guide strips here, and these are back here. Okay, so we're going to use these 2 on the bottom. We'll need to cut those out. Now if you don't want to ruin your instructions, just make a photocopy of this. Now, coming back to our diagram here. Alright, so this guide goes on the smaller end here. And for this, you're going to want to have a permanent marker handy. It's easier to write on the plastic that way. And we're going to align these arrows with the molding line here that you can see. And you can use either side as long as you do it consistently. Alright, so we're going to line up there. Now the hard part is if you got really faint molding lines, it may be a little bit difficult. Try shifting around to the other side if you're not seeing them easily. Okay, now these lines are actually not supposed to meet there. And I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of masking tape on this. Okay, so one line here should be in line with the molding here, and it doesn't matter which one as long as you do it consistently with both strips. So now I'm going to take the other strip here, okay, take its line and line it up with the mold line, wrap that around. And again, just use a little piece of masking tape here to hold that in place. Okay, now the general idea here is that we're going to cut all the way through this. So these lines have to come down all the way. and then even down here. So now I'm going to pull my masking tape off. Now for this, alright, there's no room to write down here, so we'll just leave that one alone. We've got 2 marks. Up here I do have room that I can make a couple of marks. So we'll go ahead and do this. And then we can just take a ruler here and connect the dots. The dot's a little off there, that's okay. What this is going to do in the end is we're going to cut a slit along our lines here, and that will allow, oh that's awful, that will allow the threaded rod to stick out a little bit. So it'll actually cover the threaded rod instead of having it being out there. Okay. So we can extend this down a little bit. Alright, and if you ended up like mine where your dots are not completely aligned, just kind of get the general outline there. Okay, now you can use, they're suggesting a razor saw. You could also just use an X-Acto knife, but it's going to take a little bit longer. I have a little hobby saw here, which what they're calling a razor saw. And first we're just going to cut off the 2 termination pieces here. And so we're doing this at this pre-molded line. And then we'll do the same thing on the larger terminus there. Okay, so now what we need to do is this is going to go on like this, and it's actually going to cover those first 2 rings there, or at least the first ring. Okay, now you may, if you've got edges like this, like I do here, you can trim those with a hobby knife. And then when we have all the cutting done here, actually I may do this before I cut the slot there, is go ahead and sand this. Okay, so I'm just going to see what I've got here. Take a little 150 grit sandpaper. We don't need to do a lot here, just make it smooth. And do that to both sides. Okay, and we may need to do a little bit more touch up there. Alright, so next we're going to cut through along the line here and cut this slit out. Now in the instructions it actually says there that this may look a little funny at first, but this will get filled in by fillets later on. Now I'm going to change blades here. This is a really fine blade. I'm going to use a little bit coarser one. So I'm going to change this and I'll be right back. I've changed out my saw blade for a deeper one here. It's also got a little bit coarser cut to it. But this way we should be able to kind of cut everything all at once. Now again, if you don't have one of these, you don't need to rush out and buy one. Although if you're looking for an excuse to do so, this might be a good time. But you can just use your hobby knife here. It's just going to take a little bit longer. Now we will need to clean this up a little bit, but we can wait on that until we get everything mounted. Now I missed the other cut here, so I was cutting it. At this point we actually need to cut off this shoulder here. Okay, so if you're watching this video in advance, just cut it here to begin with and save yourself some time. And this is going to be a little bit more difficult because it's loose now. We'll try and get through this. That's what it should look like. Okay, so again, hopefully you've gone through the whole video before starting the build here. I'm going to clean this up again. Now, once this is in its proper shape, it's going to go over the aft end of our motor mount and should cover the aftmost centering ring and just come close to here. Now my middle centering ring is shifted a bit, but that's okay. It just looks wobbly, but it's structurally fine. Okay, and this should go right at the edge there. To attach the boat tail then, we're going to use a gel type super glue. We're going to put this all around that aft ring. And you want a fairly heavy bead, not so much that it's dripping along the edges. But it may still have to fill a few little spaces in there. And just putting the tail cone on may move stuff around as well. Okay, so here I'm going to open up the tail cone with my fingers. Okay, and then we'll let that close, and this is where having that thick CA glue is going to help. Alright, now go ahead and pull that tight and get it aligned as best you can there, because the body tube will come up to this point. And once you've got it where it's supposed to be, go ahead and tape that in place with some masking tape. Okay, make final adjustments there. Okay, we're also going to need some glue right along this edge. Alright, so that way it fills in that little gap there. But we don't want to just let this dry like that. So take a tissue and just wipe around the inside there to remove the excess glue. Otherwise it may prevent the motor from fitting properly. And I also got some glue on my threads there, so I'm going to take that off as well. Okay, now we'll let that whole thing dry once more. My glue should be dry now, so I'm going to remove the masking tape here and just do a little wiggle test. Everything seems to be in place. Now, in preparation for mounting this into the body tube, I'm going to go ahead and run the shock cord down through the motor mount from the forward end and out the aft here. And this will just keep it out of the way when we go to glue this in place. Right now, though, I'm just going to do a dry fit. Make sure we don't have any problem areas. A little tight there. So we may have to do a little sanding of that ring. Okay, but it does fit, albeit tightly. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is mark the body tube for the fins before we put things together here. Alright, and we're going to cut out this fin alignment guide. Now, like I did with the motor mount tube, I'm going to mark one end of this as aft, just on the inside here. And I'm going to wrap this around the aft end, leaving a little bit of a gap there so we can see the marks on both sides of the fin marking guide. Okay, and just take a little bit of masking tape here to hold that in place. Alright, then we're just going to go around here and make a little tick mark at each of the arrows. Now for the motor mount here, this is where we're going to align the threaded rod. And so I'm just going to make a little notation here. Just put rod there. Okay, then we've got another fin line. And then the launch lug. Same way, I'm just going to write lug there. And then one more fin. And then we can remove this. And then you can either use a piece of angle aluminum or a door frame or some other fin marking guide. This one's made by Estes, and I use this a lot. And it's basically just a whole bunch of different depth straight edges. I'm going to recheck here and make sure that we get the right length of lines. Okay, and they're going to have us do the entire length of the body tube. That's a bit of overkill, but it does help you align things better. The main one I'm worried about going the full length here is going to be for the launch lug. Because it really does help keep your launch lug aligned if you've got a line that you can sight against. Okay, now the fin lines really don't need to go that far. You want to extend a little bit beyond where the fin is. I'm going to go up about a third of the length of the body tube, and even that's going to be quite a bit. Right, now for the threaded rod, you really don't need much of a line. I'm just going to connect those two tick points there. And then we've got another fin line there, and then our last fin line. Alright, the next step is to actually install the motor mount, and we've already moved our shock cord down like we needed to there. Now what they want us to do is put in 2 rings of wood glue up inside the body tube, and the idea is to have one ring of glue for each centering ring here. The problem is when you do it this way, the first ring here, the forward ring, is going to pass through the ring of glue for the middle ring, and it's just going to push it all forward. Okay, so that really doesn't do what people think it's going to do. Now instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a ring of wood glue there for the forward ring, and then in the aft section I'm actually going to use some super glue, and I will put that in after I've actually inserted this part way. So the way this will work is I'll put my ring of glue up in here about 5 inches. Alright, we'll insert this, and Once I get it to this point, I can put a ring of super glue, the thick type again here, right inside the body tube edge there, and then I'll simply push this in. Okay, now again, we're running into a little bit of a tightness problem here, and part of it I think is due to the threaded rod. It kind of bulges up right about here, but also since this ring ended up going on a little bit wonky there, it's also sticking up a bit. And so here I can just take a little bit of sanding paper here, and we'll just sand that ring. Okay, so we'll try this again, and our rod's going to go there. Okay, it's still a little tight, but I think we'll be okay. But because of that, I may actually put the cyanoacrylate glue on the shoulder there and then push it in. I'm a little bit concerned that we'll get this part way in and the glue is going to bind to that middle ring and it'll get stuck out here, and I don't want that. Okay, and then if we push any glue forward, we can just really quickly take that off with a tissue or a rag or something like that. Okay, now instead of actually measuring 5 inches, first thing I'm going to do is just take my applicator here and measure it against the part of the engine mount that'll go up inside the tube. Okay, then we're going to take some wood glue here. I've got a bunch in the cap, so we'll use that first. Alright, so I've got that on there, and I'm going to stick my thumb in here until I rest against the thumbnail. Alright, and then I'm going to push this across the inside edge there. Now you won't be able to see this in the camera, but I'm checking to make sure we do have a good ring of glue. Okay, so now I'm going to push this in. And again, I want to have that rod there. Alright, now we haven't quite reached the glue yet, and so now I can put this in. Now if you want to follow the instructions and just use a ring of wood glue, you can do that as well. And if you want to do that, you'll just not quite push this all the way in. Alright, and you can put some glue in there and then push it in as well. Either way will work fine. And you could even do a little of both if you wanted to, which I may do here. Alright, so I'm going to put a little bit of the wood glue in so that my middle centering ring has something good to bind to. Alright, and then we'll put the super glue on down below here. Now I don't want to push that all the way in until I'm ready to commit to the whole thing there. Alright, now the reason I'm using the thick super glue here is it's good for binding unlike surfaces. So here I'm trying to bind plastic to cardboard. And the wood glue won't stick to the plastic very well. If I use plastic cement, it doesn't stick to the cardboard very well. So this is kind of a compromise type of adhesive. Alright, now we're just going to push this whole thing together. Alright, and we've got some glue extruded there, which we will now wipe off. And that'll also help fill in any gaps that might occur between the plastic and the cardboard there. You do want to do this part quickly though. Okay, a little bit on the cardboard is fine. Alright, now once again we're going to let this dry. Our next step is to assemble the payload bay. And so the first thing we're going to do is pop the little dot out of the bulkhead here, and that should just go right through. And then this is going to fit into the coupler. Now before we do that, we're going to pass that 6-inch remnant of the shock cord that we saved. Okay, and we're going to first tie a knot in it here, leaving as much loop as we can. Okay, so something about like that. Alright, it's just a water knot or a single fisherman's loop knot. And then we're going to pass the loop part here through the hole. So you just got to kind of scrunch it together and shove it through there. Alright, and that knot should catch there. And then we'll just kind of splay out the free ends like this. And it doesn't matter how exactly you do it. But now we're going to put a dollop of wood glue on that and just kind of spread it around. Alright, the idea here is to just embed these ends in the glue. Which they may be reluctant to do, that's alright. We'll just put a little more glue over here. Basically, you just want it so the ends are not getting out beyond the edge. And if you need to, you can just put a little bit of masking tape on there to hold those down while the glue sets. Alright, and then even if the masking tape gets glued on, you can just cut away the excess. Okay, so I'm just going to set that aside to dry probably for about 30 minutes. Now while the glue on the bulkhead is drying there, we can go ahead and move to the coupler itself. And we need to make a mark halfway in between the edges there, so that'll be at 1.5 inches. Now, in the instructions, it has us attaching the bulkhead first to the coupler and then putting the coupler into the payload bay. Since we're waiting on glue on the coupler, we can reverse that without any problems. So what I'll do here then is we're going to put a bead of glue inside this. Now I'm going to dry fit this just to make sure. Usually it's not a problem. Alright, but that's where we're going to put it to. Alright, so we're going to put a bead of glue just inside here. Like that. Alright, and then in one nice smooth motion go up to the line there, kind of gently twist it back and forth a little bit so that the glue seats well, and then this can be drying at the same time as the bulkhead. The glue has dried on both the bulkhead and the coupler here, and so we're ready to put them together. I'm going to do a dry fit here just to make sure it's going to go in readily, and it does. Now when this is in its final position, it's just going to be a few millimeters away from being flush there. So what we'll do is take some wood glue, and we're going to put this right along that edge to start with. Okay, and then we're just going to go ahead and put this in. Okay, so we should have a little edge just like that, just inside there. You can make it a little deeper if you want. So I'm going to drop that down a little. I don't want to go too far here. Okay, and then once that glue has set enough that it's not going to wiggle out of place on us, we'll put a bead of glue around this side to make a fillet. The glue on the bulkhead is dry enough that we can work with it now. So we'll go ahead and apply the fillet. Once again, we're going to use wood glue here, and we're just going to run this around the edge to fill in any gaps there. Okay, and then just take a finger and smooth those in. And if you have excess, you can just kind of run it out onto the wood here. That'll protect it a little bit from the ejection charges. Alright, and just make sure if you get anything on the outside here that you clean that off. Alright, and that can go back to drying.